Hey guys, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
That's right. Big
Big,
week.
big week of action in Congress, which
Yeah.
is a surprising thing to get to say. After the last 4 years, I'm so used to assuming nothing is happening in Congress, even when they're
Yeah.
voting
And
on
it was
things.
touch and go for a minute.
It certainly was. It was touch and go
For
for,
10 hours.
I was going to say,
At least, at minimum.
touch and go for longer than a business day.
Right.
But the
Yeah.
Senate did finally pass the COVID relief package that the House sent on to them in
Yeah.
in altered form. It's still a $1.9 trillion package.
Yeah.
The final vote was 50 to 49 because Dan Sullivan, the senator from Alaska, had a family emergency or something and couldn't
Yeah.
make it to the vote. So they didn't need Kamala to come in and do anything.
That's too bad. That could have been very dramatic for everyone.
I know that they're disappointed about
Oh,
her lack
it
of
would have
ability.
been a very heroic moment for her too, for when she has to run for president in
That's right.
4 years.
I know.
Um,
The fact that she was not she was needed for some other tie-breaking votes at other points during
right.
this week,
The
but
votorama.
yeah, but the fact that she didn't get to be the
Oh,
tie-breaking vote on
oh
this
yeah, actually, and
probably.
not even during the votorama, I don't think, just during some
No, it was during.
because he was not there for any of that. But yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, this is all during the votorama, but it looks like the House is going to vote on a reconciliation bill on Tuesday, so Biden should be able to sign it Wednesday-ish. You should be able to get what is not going to be $2,000, but a sum that
Yeah.
is less than that in the few days after,
Yeah.
and we can all pretend like we never heard them say $2,000.
I know. And we're going to tell you what's in there. Some things you've probably heard about. We're going to go on some rants about some of the things that made it in here, didn't make it in here. I don't want it to also seem like, not that I really care whether people think I'm fully happy or mad about this one way or the other, but like, I like, you know, to get something like this passed is monumental. So,
Yes.
on a razor's edge, and yes, Joe Manchin did Joe Manchin, and we'll get into that too. But like, I think there has to be some credit given for everybody staying the course, for having a decent plan to get this passed, even though it got messy for a minute, and even though it is far from imperfect.
No, far from
But
perfect. It's also far
far
from imperfect.
far
It's
from right,
far
far
from
from perfect.
any
Sorry, very
sort of
imperfect.
certain measurement.
Right, exactly. But they got it done, and that's better than having not gotten it done.
I saw a lot of people online struggling with that same sentiment because obviously, at a certain point, we have to acknowledge that I mean, this is, I think, the COVID relief package that has the most stuff for people in it. So, like, in the past, we'd been getting these massive packages, and the bulk of them was going to, like, bailing out corporations and
Right,
tax
businesses,
cuts
PPE
and
loans to
yeah.
yeah,
And this is really a package that is designed to reach people, not the people that Mitt Romney would like to believe corporations are. So,
right.
in that sense, this is like a massive success. It's also a success because Mitch McConnell blasted Democrats for taking what he called a partisan approach to passing it, which is the most hilarious thing I've ever heard because not a single member of his caucus voted in favor of it.
I
So
know.
I don't know who's being partisan and who's not.
Right, exactly.
But
And if he
there,
doesn't think Democrats should get credit for the economic recovery, then certainly Republicans shouldn't get credit for it either.
well, no, he keeps
So
claiming
nobody's
that
gonna, in his world, nobody gets credit for it.
the tide was already turning. So if there is an economic recovery, and he's not certain there will be one, then it's not fair if the Democrats just get credit for it. I would like to
Oh,
point out that I read something that stuck with me this week, which was that every Democratic president's first major piece of legislation for like the last 20 years has been a Recovery Act. And that should tell you everything you need to know
right,
about what's been
exactly.
going on.
Well, and I think that they learned, I think that Biden, and he had been talking about this on the campaign trail, but I think learned maybe not as much of a lesson as he should have learned from the one that he helped negotiate to kick off the Obama administration, because I think
Right.
everyone now collectively agrees that it was too small. This one maybe is too small also, and
But
maybe
less too
isn't quite
small.
as but it's less too small. So
And it's
in a
also
way that Biden doesn't often take a note, I think maybe he did this time around.
he got half
Actually,
of a note out of this. I think also the first, the Obama Recovery Act is considered in many ways also just like a messaging failure, because people remember that legislation as not benefiting them. They remember it as a giveaway to corporations. They remember every bailout, every major economic piece of legislation that Obama passed is remembered now in very in less than flattering terms, because people never saw a dime from any of that. And the times that they did see a dime, it was specifically designed to make them think that they hadn't seen it so that they would spend it. So the Obama administration never took any credit for any of the things that benefited people's lives in those pieces of legislation, and also so few of the pieces did. Whereas this, I think, if nothing else, Biden did help Democrats negotiate down from their own ideas. So that is still an unqualified success, I think, of the Biden method. But the bulk of this legislation does go to programs that directly benefit people, which is a massive deal, and also a real departure from the kinds of rescue packages we were seeing under the Trump administration. So it differs a little bit from the House version. We talked last week about the House version. We will now complain about how it differs. Because the House version had boosted unemployment benefits by $400 a week. This was the hill Joe Manchin chose to die on in this package.
Wild.
He did not want people to have $400 a week. I would point out that we had $600 in the original bill, and people liked that, and that basically kept people from dying of starvation. It kept the economy afloat. It kept people from dying of starvation. It kept some of them in their homes, not enough of them, but the $600 was just at the bottom of almost enough, and
we picked that $600 for a reason. We picked that as essentially an average of. I can't remember exactly the math, but we talked about it on this podcast.
It was
the $600
wage, I believe.
Yeah, it was intentional. The $600 was intentional. The $400 was arbitrary, and then
it's just
cutting
less
it down
than $600.
It's just less than $600, and then $300 was just less than $400. I mean, we basically got into crazy town here trying to figure out what
was what the Republicans decided that they would do after $600 was such an unqualified success. Because they don't like to take a success and just run with it. They like to bargain down to, for the deficit, of course, to save the deficit. In any case, Joe Manchin hates unemployed people, which is wild given his state's economic situation. He paralyzed the entire Senate for 10 hours because he was threatening to side with Republicans over this benefit in particular, because he wanted to cut weeks out of these bolstered unemployment benefits. So in the end, Biden had to call him, Schumer had to meet with him, they had to get a bunch of concessions. They trimmed several weeks of unemployment benefits off of the compromise amendment from earlier, and added a cap to, there had also been a proposal to not tax that additional money. And so they added a cap to it. And then basically, Joe Manchin wanted to make sure for 10 hours, he held up all government business to make sure that your unemployment benefits will run out in the middle of their summer recess instead of in September when they're in session. That's what
there were a ton of different proposals on this too. And for a while, it appeared as though he might be siding with one of the Republican proposals, which was why there was so much panic going on about this. And it's not abnormal necessarily for someone to decide to hold something up, or for someone to try and get concessions out of this or whatever. But the fact that it took all day, everyone was really like, what is Joe Manchin doing? This should have taken a 10-minute call from the president, and then and that really should have been it. And I was really glad actually by the end of the day, because the reason that, and also you would normally think okay, well, this got held up one day, not a big deal, but it was kind of a big deal, because that day was supposed to have been spent voting on amendments. They were supposed to be starting the vote-a-rama. And so that was already going to be lasting all night long, basically. And so he pretty much, he held them up from what they probably could have voted on, 10 amendments in the amount of time that he was holding them up that day. And by the end of the day, when that was still happening, the news sort of started to turn on him, because I think a lot of people were like, this bill is uh, favored by a large majority of the country. I think it's something in the 60 percentile. I mean, even Republicans like this.
Yeah, well, people need the
And
help.
people need the help. And I think that especially when we really sort of like when people started getting into the nitty gritty as to what it was that it seemed like he was trying to negotiate, everybody was kind of like, really, like 3 weeks from unemployment benefits is what you're up to
Well,
here? And
here's
I
the
had a, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to just say his other stated reason for dying on this hill was that he said, okay, well, the vaccines are going to be coming by June or July. So the economy should be opening back up. So I don't want to pay people any more than $1,000 extra a month to stay home. So he was trying to negotiate down the amount and the time that it would last because he thinks somehow that when June and July come,
Everybody just has jobs again.
miraculously all have jobs again.
Right.
As if
Sure.
the fact that like half of the businesses people are unemployed because of aren't closed
Permanently closed
doesn't mean that there's going to be some time for this recovery to actually take
Well,
place.
and we know so many of them are permanently closed also. I mean, it's
yeah,
not like small businesses are just like waiting to reopen. They closed
right.
because they went fucking broke, right?
Exactly. And then on top of that, a lot of the same people that are in need of these benefits are behind on their rent. So they're about to owe a shit ton of money in back rent. They're behind on other expenses. They've not been paying their debts. That, like, in addition to all of the problems that will just accompany like trying to reopen the economy when half of the businesses in the economy just like disappeared into thin air, is the fact that everyone is starting from behind now. Because instead of giving people rent relief, you gave them a vague kind of like rent future debt scenario. Instead of giving people a break on, the debts that they already had, you like gave them a little break on the interest, and then they're going to have to start paying those debts again. So it's not like in June, even if everyone has a vaccine, we're all just going to be like at full employment, just like having a party.
Right, exactly. And as we were sort of going through and pulling what was in this bill, I started wondering how much percentage of the overall $1.9 trillion each of these pieces accounts for, because I was like, it seemed to me in my head, and I feel like I was right, that the things that they were negotiating down couldn't have possibly really been taking up so much of the $1.9 trillion. So this unemployment specifically, sorry, I was just like,
he got
lost my
lost
train of
in
thought.
his
And
own...
also like, this just gets me so angry. I'm gonna hit on it multiple times as we go here. But the entirety of the unemployment, the $300 extension through the end of July, takes up 12% of the overall $1.9 trillion. So you can imagine that negotiating down from $400 and then holding up the Senate for an entire day over whether it was going to end in July or September is fucking pennies.
Yeah,
right.
It's not a big enough.
So you have to wonder why this was the hill that he chose to die on. It just doesn't make any sense if he's going to go around saying that, like, he's worried about the deficit and the price tag was too big. And, we're going to tell you specifically how each of these plays a role in the overall $1.9 trillion. But like the things that became sticking points, really pennies.
Yeah.
In the overall $1.9 trillion. So it's crazy that this was the choice that Joe Manchin decided to make, because it doesn't make any sense. And he didn't save any money. Like, you didn't see how this bill was supposed to be $1.9 trillion. It's still $1.9 trillion, even though Joe Manchin was able to get a bunch of money out of it. And the reason is because the things that Joe Manchin was trying to negotiate with himself over weren't actually worth anything.
No, and also are almost always money that goes to people. Like, there are places they could have saved money in this bill that we will point out to you. But it is interesting to me that the places that they found Democrats having sticking points with were always fucking direct cash to people.
Yep.
It's like wild that they don't trust us to spend our own money that we gave to them. They don't trust themselves to spend the money because they won't pay for government programs to actually give you this money. You know, like
Yeah.
we're going to talk in a second about the COBRA extension. They won't just put those people on a public health plan. They would rather pay for their COBRA benefits, which is way more expensive.
Right.
But
And
so
is
they
a
won't
direct
trust
payment to health
themselves to
insurance
spend the money
companies who had their best year
ever.
Yeah.
So they won't trust themselves to spend the money, and they won't trust us to spend the money. They will literally only trust corporations to spend the money. That's
Right.
the only reliable group of people that they don't feel worried about giveaways to. They
Yeah.
feel like if they can find a way to like pay a middleman to take a profit off of an amount of money that could have directly benefited individual people, they would rather have that non-human corporation, sorry, Mitt Romney, get that money instead. So
Yeah, totally.
that to me is always a curious thing about
Yeah.
the Democratic philosophy specifically, because you
Yep.
know, we are supposed to be a party of big government. We're supposed to be a party that believes government can do things, and without fail, the only policies they like don't question the sort of like need for funding for are policies that bail out middlemen, who are the exact people that we're trying to cut out of the equation of government to people help. Like,
Right.
either give us the money or give yourselves the money. We paid you the money so that you could take care of us. Like,
Right.
you don't get to the only people who you should have a critical eye towards the spending for
Yeah.
is the corporations, is the business community. You know, like it just doesn't make any sense to me that they always are willing to die on a hill of one of those two things and never are willing to think to themselves, I wonder if there's a cheaper way for us or them to use this money. Like,
I know. And yes, because another thing that they did, and this just boggles the mind because, well, I will tell you what it is, but they lowered so they're sending out, we already know that they lowered the payments from $2,000 to $1,400. But then they negotiated with themselves again this week, right? I mean, you have to know that like if all 50 Democrats vote for this, then it passes. So literally anytime you're hearing about debate on this, it's only Democrats with themselves.
Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and the rest of the Democrats.
Right. So they lowered so previously you got the full amount of the check if you made up to $75,000. And then after that, it phased out up to $100,000. Well, they changed it this week to phase out after $80,000. So there's a phase out between $75,000 and $80,000. So, right. So now the people who made between $80,000 and $100,000 who previously got stimulus checks are not going to get those stimulus checks. And there's a lot of problems here. Mainly that, you know, I think that just sort of implies that you are telling people who made between $80,000 and $100,000 that they don't actually need any help and that they are not working class people and that they might not have families and that a million different things like this. But besides that, I think it is somewhere between like 10 and 12 million people that this affects. You know, there's the rare instance where a lot of times you will vote on something that is good policy or bad politics. Or sometimes you will vote on something that is good politics and bad policy. This is bad politics and bad policy.
Right.
Like it's the rare combination.
This is bad messaging.
Not rare enough, but
it means that tens of millions of people, and these are the kind of people who, by the way, we worked very hard to win back in this election.
Because these are working class people, $80,000 to $100,000, especially depending on where you're at in the country.
It's middle class people.
Is middle class.
Yeah. It's
100%.
And also, I think that the other thing is it sort of implies that, you know, the government doesn't have a real understanding about how some of the aspects of this crisis have impacted people who are earning more than like starvation wages as well. I mean, you don't know based on people's 2019 tax returns or 2020 tax returns, like how they're doing now, but you do know that the purpose of stimulus money is to get money injected into the economy. And between $80,000 and $100,000, you are still in a tax bracket and in a sort of income bracket where that money would get spent.
Right, exactly.
I think that's what it frustrates me, A, because it means tens of millions of people are getting stimulus funds from Trump and not Biden. That's stupid messaging, and it's not worth the savings.
Stupid.
And B, it means that the group of people that are most likely to inject this cash into the economy on the kinds of things that working class people benefit from, on services in their communities, on businesses in their communities, things like that, those people are getting cut out of the stimulus funding. So it's like the money's going to go to like paying off debts on one hand, and
Yep.
maybe paying for like basic expenses, for a group of people. But the people that actually would inject the most of this cash into the economy are like not going to get it. And it's all just to make a statement about cost
Yep.
savings, because none of it is really about saving money.
Right. That's the thing. This one, in terms of how much it takes up of the overall 1.9 trillion bill, the 1,400 direct payments account for 22%. So it is a little bit more, but still less than a quarter. And you have to imagine that just sending smaller than $1,400 checks between two people who make between $80,000 and $100,000 would have been, again, pennies in the overall scheme of $1.9 trillion. So again, they have negotiated down on something that would have actually gone directly to people that would have had a big impact on economic recovery. So
Well,
like,
and that's why
again,
the House
you have to ask yourself why this was
had
the
those
choice.
caps. I mean, in the House bill, it was individuals earning 100,000, single parents earning 120,000, and couples up to 200,000, and they lowered it to 80,000 for individuals and 160,000 for couples. It is not worth the political loss that you take on that.
Like, why
You
bother?
already
Why?
reneged on the $2,000. Like,
Right.
it's like they like nickel and diming us our own money after they
Yeah.
failed to contain an enormous crisis that cost all of us our jobs and lives. Like,
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense politically to
Yeah.
die on this hill either. It didn't make sense to me when they were dying on the $1,400 check hill. It didn't, that already didn't make any sense to me. But certainly can like further limiting that so that there is like a group of people who were probably, important voters for you to be appealing to in states like Georgia, who are going to be like, you already lied to me about the $2,000, and now you're telling me I don't even get a fucking check? Like, fuck off. And, they would be right to feel frustrated by that.
Yep. They sure would.
And I just don't know why you don't campaign on a specific amount and then continue to peel it back this way.
Yeah.
After you got the majority, like with
So
that,
stupid.
that was the message that got them the majority.
Yeah.
Like, you
Bad
just
politics.
don't do that. And then to have this messaging of them continuing to peel it back further is just like insanity.
Yeah.
One thing that made it through unscathed is the child allowance, which I was shocked about, because that's actually like the biggest piece of for
It's
families.
huge.
That's going to be a huge amount of money, and rightfully so. I mean, right now, like dealing with the expenses of having children, with childcare, with all of the ways in which families have gotten just sort of pulled under by this crisis, it was important that there be some acknowledgement that people with kids in particular needed assistance. I would say that the fact that that one made it through unscathed, but the one that is sort of messaging wise going to everybody didn't, is maybe problematic, because it is much harder to message something that is only for people with children and is not direct cash. It's a tax savings.
Credit.
It's not a cash.
Yeah.
It's not a stimulus money, and so it's not direct cash. It's a tax deal, and it doesn't go to a lot of people. And so the fact that it's great that it's so generous and certainly needed, but it's weird to me that that one made it through and that they nickel and dimed the one that, broadly speaking, has the most ability to like get them votes.
Yeah.
This seems crazy to me. Here's the thing that seems the craziest to me, though. They continued down this path of subsidizing fucking Cobra coverage for people. Here's the thing. And it actually, the House version had them subsidize it at 85%, and this version has them subsidize it at 100% of the premiums, which means that the Senate, where they took money away from unemployed people and took money, and that means broadly unemployed people. That means people that maybe did not lose their job with their benefits from a good job with benefits, but just like lost their income. And, the people most in need of that are least likely to have had benefits attached to that prior job.
Yep.
And decided that they were going to instead put that money, if you're wondering where the 1.9 figure stayed the same, they're putting that money into fucking health insurance companies. First of all,
this is wild.
Put those people on fucking Medicare. or Medicaid.
Obviously.
I mean, it's so much
Way
cheaper.
cheaper. And that's where you get into this sort of whole thing where, like, don't tell me that you're worried about, nickel and diming me elsewhere because of the deficit, because the first off, fuck the deficit. But second
Right.
off, like, you could have certainly, as you said, put these people on Medicare. It's insane because Cobra is so expensive. You know that if you've ever been
Yeah. Have you
had
ever
to go on Cobra,
go
it's
on Cobra?
astronomical,
It's incredibly
right?
expensive.
But also, had they really wanted if they were worried about the price tag and they were fine with $1.9 trillion being the overall cost, like, $350 billion went to state aid. I'm not saying that that isn't necessary. And we've been calling for that for quite some time. And, like, obviously that will sort of be seen by you in ways that are maybe less, less relevant to your daily life anyway, and then just like
Less
getting an
visible to your
actual
daily
get
life.
it
Probably
visual to your
relevant.
daily
Yeah.
relevant, right? Visual, right? Yeah, to your daily life. But, like, certainly they probably could have made that $340 billion and then covered those extra 3 weeks of unemployment insurance. They could have made that $320 billion and covered the giving people $1,400 checks who made between $80 and $100,000. I'm not certain that that exact math checks out, but, like, the fact that they chose to screw around with the actual pieces that account for, like, money in your pocket and not dick around with any of the other stuff that bloated up this bill to
Well, and in
$1.9 trillion.
particular, bloated further the piece that benefits to health insurance companies who had their best year ever last year.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that piece of it really frustrates me because that means that Joe Manchin died on a hill of transferring money that would have gone directly to you to health insurance companies. And I want to point out that they have expanded open enrollment. And that was the right thing to do because it's insane to me that you can only sign up for health insurance at one point in the year, especially during a crisis where people are losing their job left, right, and center. But that means that nobody actually has to stay on Cobra. If you could effectively subsidize private health insurance premiums anyway, then do it in the fucking exchanges instead of paying Cobra rates. Cobra is, as a expenditure, Cobra is much more
So
expensive
expensive.
than buying
Yeah.
on the exchange. It's much more expensive than buying, than publicly funding the health insurance and just putting you through a public system. Put the money where it's going to benefit the most people.
Yeah.
Increase the Affordable Act subsidies, not minorly like they did, but make those 100% covered.
Yeah.
Like, I just like the idea of insisting that we have to cut health insurance premiums, cut the unemployment package, and we have to cut the direct payments, and we like somehow needed to spend extra money on Cobra, and they're positioning that as if it's a great thing that they did for people's health insurance. But it is not, because you only have Cobra if you lost a job that had health insurance in the first place. First of all, so that is already
100%.
going to people who are in a better financial situation than the people who've been paying out of pocket this whole time. And second of all, the exchange is where everyone has to go after they leave their job. That's where everyone is. So instead of only helping people who were once employed with benefits, which is already a fairly privileged group of people, you could be using that money to help everyone. Everyone has bodies, so everyone has health or not health. And instead, they chose to raise that funding? Like, that is not it, you guys.
It's just wild. I mean, it's like, I think I texted you yesterday something to the effect of, like, leave it to the Democrats to figure out how to pass a near $2 trillion deal and then have the only things in it that aren't as good as they should be the things that, like, are the things that people are going to be like, are going to be money in people's pockets. It's just sort of like they literally passed one of the biggest deals ever. And, like, kudos to them, as we said, to sort of kick the podcast off. But, like, even still, they figured out a way to make it not be as good as it should have been in terms of, like, helping, like, John Q.
And to not even be as good as the House thought of.
Well,
and the House, by the way, is not a bunch of, like, raging progressives. So, like, we think about, like, the House already was trying to subsidize your Cobra at 85%. And, like, look, you shouldn't have to pay for Cobra at all as a person who lost your job because Cobra's insane. You should have health insurance access, and it would be great if some of that health insurance, those premiums could be paid at 100%. Like, I'm here for it. I just, like this specific point where they chose the least efficient way to spend that money and took money away from the direct payment schemes in order to find an inefficient way to spend money on an industry that is like rolling in money right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I cannot with these people.
Yeah.
In any case,
Oy.
the whole voterama took 11 hours and 50 minutes because of Joe Manchin, and that just goes to show you. I don't know what that just goes to show you that Democrats can be awful too. The other thing that happened is, so Sanders promised that because they took the $15 an hour minimum wage out of the COVID relief bill, that he would make them vote on it. And he did, because Bernie Sanders wants to get you on the record about the $15 an hour minimum wage. There were 8 Democratic awfuls who voted against it. The entire GOP did, but like, let's not worry about them. We want to call out the 8 Democrats who voted against it.
Yeah. Well, it's, I guess essentially 7 Democrats and then Angus King. But
Angus King caucuses with the Democrats. He counts as a Democrat. I'm not giving you this one.
Oh no, I'm not
giving
you.
You know what I mean?
Right. I wasn't trying to be like, oh, he's not a Democrat, so it's fine. He voted no on this. No, he usually votes with the Democrats. He probably votes with the Democrats more than Joe Manchin does.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and he caucuses with the Democrats. He's like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah,
he's from a different wing of the independent movement
he is.
than Bernie Sanders. But in any case, so our story begins with Kristen Sinema, the great disappointment, Kristen Sinema, who got a lot of flack, deservedly so, because of the panache with which she voted no on the $15 an hour minimum wage. And it got compared pretty frequently to it sort of had like a let them eat cake kind of vibe. Because the clip that you probably saw is her doing this really like sassy thumbs down no vote in front of the clerk. And then Brent alerted me to a longer form of that video that I had not seen.
Right. Well, and this was what I feel like was the most important, actually. I mean, I was pissed because I had texted, I think, you guys the video, you and Grant, the video of her doing that on the day that she did. I guess it would have been Friday. And everybody was like rightly angry because it did sort of like you said, it had the very sort of like, let them eat cake vibe. And like, it was just seemed very dramatic.
She was like real proud.
Right. But there was part of me, besides obviously being angry with her for doing that, that also just sort of like, at least part of me was writing that off to Kristen Sinema being a very odd character.
Yes.
Like in a way where like I was like, yes, I am mad at Kristen Sinema for voting against this minimum wage increase, but also that's just Kristen Sinema being Kristen Sinema.
Right.
But then, as Lila mentioned, the longer form clip I noticed the other day is her walking in from the side, tapping Mitch McConnell on the back, who happens to be standing there, to get his attention, to make sure he knows that she's present. He sort of half acknowledges her. Then she keeps walking. She stops, looks back at him, basically flags him down, like while he's speaking to someone, to like try and get his attention again, which he doesn't give to her, by the way. Like,
I know.
Never. He acknowledges her first when she walks in.
I've never respected Mitch McConnell more than when he turns away after the second time that she tries to flag him down for doing this.
But the reason that she did that so dramatically was literally it was a show for one person and one person only, and that person being Mitch McConnell. And that is actually what is most unacceptable about that clip, is that she really was trying to impress Mitch McConnell with a dramatic thumbs down.
And here's a few things to keep in mind about that. She was also, during the impeachment trial, one of the Democrats that was like heading off to talk in a closet with Mitch McConnell about whatever when they were thinking about having witnesses. So she's already been trying to get into his good graces. But in this context in particular, I know she is in a state that is sort of purplish. I also know that Mark Kelly, the other person who is a senator from that state, voted for the minimum wage increase and is not sorry. And I also know that her own state had a statewide vote about increasing the minimum wage this year. Or last year.
They also voted on increasing income tax for people who, make over like $100,000.
Her state has spoken on this issue, and they are in favor of raising the minimum wage. So it's not like she was doing it because she felt that she had to respect the will of her voters. Like, I think, a lot of the time Joe Manchin gets away with this bullshit because no one knows what the fuck is going on in West Virginia. And
Right.
everyone is like, maybe his voters want this. Who can know
Right.
what
Trump just won by 40% in West Virginia. So,
right. Like, who can know what Joe Manchin's life is? Kristen Sinema is in a state that voted on this specific issue just last year, which is years later than she herself was elected. And also elected as a person who supported a $15 an hour minimum wage, because she is on the record supporting a $15 an hour minimum wage in the past. She is a person who elected to not raise the minimum wage in defiance of her own voters. And she did it to impress Mitch McConnell. Like, that is some trash box action over there. That is not it. That she was rightfully dragged for that for many reasons. But the idea that she is in any way reflecting the will of her voters via doing this is insanity.
She ain't. Yeah.
Obviously, Joe Manchin also voted against it. He had last month said he opposed it and that he was proposing an $11 an hour minimum wage. We talked about this last week. This is stupid because his state could really benefit from it, but his donors would not. And that, I think, is an important distinction to make.
Well, and there's one thing that I want to say about this, because one thing that has been gaining some traction, we talked last week about like how, what's his name? From Arkansas, Tom, what the hell's his name?
Cotton.
Tom Cotton.
Tom Cotton.
Yeah. Is talking about doing either a 10 or 11 or something, and then tying it to
E-Verify.
To E-Verify, but then they're also talking about tying it to so it goes up, with like inflation, or tying it to inflation, right? And we have to be very careful about that, because like I know that is something that Democrats have wanted to do, so it doesn't get stuck where it is. But like my fear is that Democrats are going to think that tying it to inflation is going to be a big win for them, because that's been something that they've been trying to do, so it doesn't get stuck. But if you start tying it to inflation when it's too low, then you're like perma-fucked on this, right?
Yeah.
So like Democrats are going to get confused by this. They're going to get out there and they're going to be like, okay, we were able to get it to 10, but also it's a big win for us because we tied it to inflation. So like we're going to take a victory lap over that. But in fact, they've just screwed themselves, and they're not going to know because they're stupid.
That's right.
I'm already having fear fantasies about the insanity of the upcoming, because Biden still claims that he wants to vote on it. Which
he claims that as a person who made no effort to make it happen.
I don't believe him. And he got a vote on it here. Did he call any of these 8 people to make sure that they voted yes on it?
He did not.
No, he didn't. So anyway, Carrie, we'll keep listing the names. Yes. I just wanted to go on that tangent briefly.
Well, that's an important point, because they're going to obviously pass a minimum wage that's too low, that's decades out of date. And then they're going to, it's going to come in slowly, so that it'll be like 5 years before it takes effect, at which point the minimum wage probably should be like $50 an hour, but it'll be 10.
Right. I was going to say, and then in 2030, it'll be $10 an hour.
Right. And then they'll peg it to inflation from there. It's like, it'll end up being worth $3 in our current dollars. So don't even worry. They're going to find a way to screw it up. Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire, a person who has advocated for, she said, in 2014, she wanted it to be $10.10. And then in 2016, she said, she was a governor in New Hampshire, so this is based in what she wanted in New Hampshire. She wanted to raise it to at least 10. And then said in 2016, I think we should look at increasing it further moving forward, but apparently draws the line at 15. Apparently that's not of interest to her. John Tester is somebody who is trying to figure out what to do, because he's in a state that Trump won by 20 points and he got very narrowly reelected and is afraid, if I had to guess. Angus King is a person who no one knows what he's ever up to. He's been busy with horrible ideas all week. He worked behind the scenes to make sure that there was an income cutoff for the direct payments. He was one of the people that wanted to lower the income cutoff, and to reduce it. I mean, so Angus King, a man up to various shenanigans aimed at not helping you. Tom Carper from the tax haven of Delaware notably said, that's a lot of money. I used to be treasurer of Delaware, and for a guy who was treasurer of the first state, that's a lot of money. Interestingly, he himself is worth $4.2 million. So seems to not have much perspective on what is and isn't a lot of
A
money
lot of money.
out there,
Right.
because I don't know that he himself would be comfortable at $15 an hour. It seems like
Yep.
he might make more than that, since he makes at least $170,000 a year, but likely more. And then
Yep.
Chris Coons, the other senator from the tax haven of Delaware, had co-sponsored a 2014 bill to raise the minimum wage to $10.10, the same one that Maggie Hassan was in support of. But I would like to note that Delaware's minimum wage right now is $9.25, but its floor on tipped wage workers, so essentially its minimum wage on tipped workers, is $2.23 an hour.
Oh, they're one of these states.
And just a quick break here to point out that the tax haven of Delaware's population is 974,000 people. They have fewer people than the island of Manhattan, which is only 2 miles wide and 14 miles long. And they have 2 senators. Manhattan doesn't have any senators. We're sharing senators with millions of idiots just out there in the world. California has 40 million people and 2 senators. And you'll notice no one in California voted against this legislation. But this is a concerted plot by the tax haven of Delaware's representatives, which is a very pro-business state, as you know, because it is a tax haven, to stymie legislation that would benefit millions of people in a state where they don't even have 1 million people.
Right.
Persons. 1 million peoples. I've had just about enough of the tax haven of Delaware. I'm not going to lie. And I also have had just about enough of the fact that Joe Biden is also from the tax haven of Delaware and could not call these fools to ask him to support his supposed position on the minimum wage.
Yep.
And I now have a suspicion that the reason that Joe Biden does not support or has not done the legwork on the $15 an hour minimum wage is the same reason that the 2 senators from the tax haven of Delaware voted against the raising it.
Yeah, he doesn't care.
He doesn't care.
Or
and
doesn't
not only
think
does
it should,
he doesn't want to.
Also doesn't think it should be 15.
He does not think the tax haven of Delaware does not see their interests lying in it being 15. I would contend that maybe that's, as a state that is a tax haven, not the most democratic state when it comes to their representation, because there is a lot of money in that state and not a lot of people. But, just pointing some things out about what we should and should not expect from the tax haven of Delaware. We did once again pass H.R. 1 in the House.
Yes, the House. And
it would be great if we could pass it in the Senate. Then we might protect voting rights a little bit. I don't know. It's an idea.
Yeah. Well, and I think that this is an interesting one because, as you mentioned, this is the voting rights bill. Did they pass it in the last Congress? They passed something similar.
It was the first thing they passed in the last Congress, but they knew
Congress
it was going nowhere because of the Senate.
Right, exactly. And so people are also sort of like thinking to themselves that it's going nowhere in this Senate. However, there are some interesting things that are potentially pushing this to be a larger conversation than just on HR 1 here, because throughout the whole campaign there was questions as to whether Democrats would end the filibuster or go through any filibuster reform, and it seemed like that they would not. There were enough people who were saying that they would not do that and didn't want to, that was dead in the water. But interestingly, what is going on as a backdrop for the passage of HR 1 is 43 states having upwards of 250 bills in their state legislatures to do something to restrict voting access to people. Then that usually, affects obviously poor communities, Black and brown communities. They're trying to right, exactly. They're trying to disenfranchise Democratic voters essentially, and they're being fairly open about that being what they're doing.
Yeah, well, a lot of places seem to be comfortable admitting that they believe Democrats are only winning because of how easy it is to vote. Which
So HR 1 specifically is bringing up some conversations about whether or not to do some sort of filibuster reform. We saw everybody's getting asked about it now, and it's because these two things are happening at the same time. We've got HR 1 being passed, and we've got states passing restricted voting provisions. We also have something, I believe, in the Supreme Court that seems like they are going to uphold some of these state provisions that have already passed previously that restricts the vote. So we need something legislatively to be able to do this. And I think the reason that I think there's an outside chance that even some people like Manchin and Sinema might take this on is because they understand that if all 250 of these bills pass in these state legislatures, presumably in ones that they are from, I know Arizona specifically has one. I don't know what goes on in West Virginia.
Who can know?
That they themselves will never win re-election again.
I mean, I think the people that are most at risk in this scenario are the very people who don't want to overturn the filibuster.
Right.
Because they want to maintain some grasp on not having to do anything.
But we had some people come out in favor of it that we had not heard be so bold about it. We had Amy Klobuchar come out for it this week. I think even Joe Manchin this morning, I was reading something, got asked about it on Meet the Press, and said that he would be open to some sort of like reforms, basically. Like, and I think one of the reforms that they're looking at is to pass voting legislation, which I think is just specifically designed to be able to sort of jam this through without there being a filibuster. So I think that it's huge that they passed that because we need it. But I think it's also was smart of them to sort of like pass very early to try and potentially get this through the Senate before some of these states pass these bills, or at least so there's some sort of like federal law that supersedes these state laws, like, you know, when they start going to court and things like that, just so they can literally make sure that more people are voting and also that they can continue to be reelected.
Well, and there's also, I think, in an effort to kind of like create a messaging win on this, there's also a bunch of ethics stuff in this bill that would, you know, there's an ethics code for the Supreme Court that would mean justices would have to basically like implement measures to prevent conflicts of interest with the president that appointed them. Obviously, that's a needed reform right now. It would ban members of Congress from sitting on corporate boards, which I can't believe is not illegal, by the way.
Wild.
I mean, I know, like, I can believe it. I'm not saying that I know where I live, but like, I just like how infuriating. It would stop lawmakers from using taxpayer money to reach settlements in employment discrimination cases stemming from their own actions, which is something that frequently happens. Your tax dollars go to protect idiots in their dumb, you know, discriminatory actions. And then it would also overturn Citizens United, which I'm sure that the Republicans will never let happen, but is a thing that would really change lives. So that's in addition to some of the voting related reforms it makes. I feel like we should at some point do like a special section, a special episode about voting rights and voting reform, because
we absolutely should.
It's becoming more and more relevant. Sorry, I'm about to cough.
No, I think we have to. It's really sort of like the most important thing that like people aren't paying attention to right now. I mean, I think people are paying attention to, but like these are the types of things that always happen. They always happen after elections. It's always Republicans trying to get people from voting, and we have to be vigilant about it. So I think that would be great. We can have our friend Kat Calvin come on.
That's right. Yeah. We'll bring Kat Calvin on without having asked her if she wants to come on. We'll just assume. But in any case, so who knows if it has a path in the Senate, but
it'll be interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we do end up doing some sort of filibuster reform, it will probably be specifically to pass HR 1.
Hopefully this is Nancy Pelosi's evil plan.
I hope so.
I hope she has an evil plan.
Honestly.
I feel like the one benefit of Nancy Pelosi is that she often has an evil plan. Yeah. And I'm relying heavily currently, because I know Chuck Schumer doesn't have an evil plan. I am really relying on Nancy Pelosi having a scheme going. I know. As much as, you know, politically, I don't always agree with her, as I think you guys know. But I do believe that she's one of the better schemers out there.
Yeah, a lot of times it's scheming to figure out how to screw the left over.
Correct. So sometimes the scheming doesn't work out in my favor, but I am hoping that someone is scheming, because currently it feels like no one is scheming, and I feel like it would be better if some schemes were happening. Just a few schemes.
Yeah, I agree.
In any case, the House also passed they're basically running through their greatest hits right now.
Yeah.
They passed a George Floyd bill, which is basically the same police reform bill that they have been claiming they're going to pass forever. It passed on party lines. It's not going anywhere in the Senate.
Bans no-knock warrants, mandates data collection on police encounters, prohibits racial and religious profiling.
Yeah,
So
redirects
it's all
some
about.
funding to community-based policing programs, things like that.
Yep.
They passed a similar version last year. Like I said, it obviously failed in the Senate. Depending on what happens with filibuster reform, we'll see if it can pass in the Senate this time, but it feels like it probably won't.
We'll see.
Which is crazy because it's a really watered down bill. It's not like revolutionary.
No.
It's just, I don't know what to say about them.
I know.
And then in like a completely unnecessary Manchin turn, I don't know what's going on with Joe Manchin right now. He's all over the place. He's got tons of bad ideas, but he also basically tanked Neera Tandan. So like he's had some ideas that were just like accidentally good. He also, though, like Tommy Tuberville in the Votorama decided to attempt to have an anti-trans amendment about barring trans kids from sports, an issue that only people like him care about.
Right.
Only bigots is what I mean. Like, this is like no one else is up at night worrying about trans kids playing sports.
Yeah.
Tommy Tuberville is up at night thinking about trans children playing children's sports. That's a thing that he thinks about to himself in his private time, which
it's concerning to him.
Have never once.
Thing that has probably never happened in Alabama.
No, and as a person who is just a person who lives in the world, it's not once crossed my mind. And it's not that I have not seen trans kids playing sports or trans adults playing sports or really anyone. It's just that I've never thought to myself about it.
Yeah.
He is thinking to himself about it. Anyway.
Yes.
Another person who apparently is Joe Manchin.
Right. This one was 50-49. It got shot down, but we had to have Lisa Murkowski vote with the Democrats to bail us out. And I have, look, Republicans are terrible. I get it. I'm sort of surprised, especially coming from Tommy Tuberville, who most of even Republicans in the Senate think is a fucking blowhard, who just got there himself, who obviously was doing this as a way to just sort of like keep everyone from actually voting on the COVID-19 bill. Like they literally had to debate this as if it was a real thing. I'm surprised more of them didn't actually vote no on this. And as I was thinking about my surprise, it reminded me, and I want to just share this. And any chance I get to tell you this, I will tell you until the end of time. But fuck the HRC, because one person who also voted for this nonsense amendment was Susan Collins, who has been getting endorsed by the HRC since the beginning of fucking time. So remember, fuck the HRC all day and forever.
That's right.
And
by the way, if you're a new listener to this podcast, we're talking about Human Rights Campaign, not Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Fuck her too.
I mean, we're not huge fans of either, but we have a specific anger with HRC that goes back years. That is about them being awful. Like. Yeah, about them being awful, about their awfulness, and specifically, this is a good example of why it doesn't matter if you think that a Republican is better on LGBTQ issues than other Republicans. I recall the time that they endorsed Mark Kirk over Tammy Duckworth for said reasons. And that does not prevent them from voting with their party on anti-trans legislation. But again, HRC is anti-trans, basically. I mean, that was part of the reason that we started hating them in the first place, was that they were not very inclusive anyway. They're the worst, you guys.
Yeah.
They're just the worst.
True story. Speaking of the worst.
Boom.
Oh, hey, transitions. Neera Tandan, she's the worst.
Dunzo.
And she's also gone. Yeah, which is great. And the Biden administration has said that they will find a place for her. And like, I had like 1 millisecond of panic where I was like, oh, it's going to be like the type of Elizabeth Warren thing where like somebody will like kill her nomination or do something or whatever, but then she'll come back stronger than ever. And I'm like, oh God, Neera Tandan is going to haunt our nightmare dreams forever. But she's not, because who the hell is she? She's going to go away, and she's going to go away forever. She might get some sort of like job pushing papers with the Biden administration, but like, I don't give a shit about her. She's essentially out of our lives, which is what's important.
she has shown, I think, something that I don't think the Biden administration really had believed how toxic she was until they saw a unity of voices opposing her nomination. Like, I think that they had thought to themselves that she was toxic the way Hillary Clinton is often perceived as toxic. But Hillary Clinton is not toxic the way that Neera Tandan is toxic. Hillary Clinton has had a 30-year war waged against her by the right that makes a lot of conspiracy theorists angry, and the left is angry at her because she's a warmonger. But she is not somebody who, like, the left will, like, go to the mat to make sure she doesn't get a job in an administration. Like, we know that she's, like, in this circle, you know?
Yeah,
like,
right.
Neera Tandan is somebody that, like, the left and the right, like, actively detest.
Yeah.
She is, like, that toxic. And she is also someone who has not exercised good self-control in her own career, which has made her so toxic. So she is not a politician. She is somebody who has alienated people via using, you know, horrible language to describe them, via insulting them, not via having different ideas than them.
Right. And suggesting we go to war with random countries so we can take their oil. So
that's, I mean, that's one thing she shares with Hillary Clinton.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Exactly.
I would contend that she has used some of that controversialness in a more extreme way.
Right. Exactly.
Well, I was just like, politically, she's very much like Hillary Clinton. And I was sort of thinking, like, you know, obviously Hillary Clinton's been the Secretary of State. Like, Hillary Clinton's been just, like, out there being a person. She never gets to be the president, but, like, she's someone Americans have, like, generally accepted to, like, do jobs of various sorts. And, like, Neera Tandan is, like, if Hillary Clinton was, like, actually an unacceptable person on top of being politically unacceptable.
Right.
Like, there's something additionally unacceptable about her that makes her not just like a political problem, but just like a person problem. In any case.
I loved this week when it became clear that they had pushed her, she was going to have to be confirmed by 2 committees before going to the full Senate, and both of those had got pushed indefinitely, I think, like at the end of last week after Manchin announced that he was going to vote no. And so apparently the Biden administration continued to, like, push as hard as possible. Like, I mean, calling in all their favors, and I mean, really just making sure, and, like, putting out statements about how qualified she is, and then starting a bunch of rumors that it was sexism and also potentially racism and various other things about why it was that this nomination was going down. And they tried everything. They tried to
Bernie Bros her.
Right. Yes. But apparently, it became clear at some point that wasn't working, because she had to, you know, remove her name. Obviously they told her that she had to. It's her own words
that caused the problem. It would be one thing if it was something that she had done, but it was things she said.
Right. And it was so amazing. There was a moment at one of the press briefings this week, because they asked Jen Psaki about, I think it was the day that she did pull her name, and, like, Neera Tandan and Jen Psaki was talking about, like, all of the lengths that they were going to or had gone to or whatever. And some genius journalist, I don't even know who it was like, you know, we've been hearing reports that the White House has not reached out to Joe Manchin in regards to the $15 minimum wage, and has not reached out to other, you know, Senate Democrats about the $15 minimum wage. So, like, why are you all spending all of this political capital to push Neera Tandan, but not to push the $15 minimum wage? And she did not have an answer at all, that made any sense. I mean, she answered it because she sort of is generally good at her job, I think, actually, Jen Psaki. But, like, and I was like, well, I don't even know who that journalist was, but, like, what a true delight. I hope they keep it up. I mean, who knows? It was probably some terrible person from Fox News or something. Who cares? That, but, like, who cares?
That's a valid follow-up question.
Well, that's one thing I'm hoping that we've learned from the Trump administration, is that, like, it is important to ask those follow-up questions, and it's important to ask them of both parties. And I understand, and I'm not saying that, like, you know, I don't really buy into this whole thing that, like, the journalism sort of, you know, leans left or favors Democrats. But I do think that there is sometimes a tendency on their part to get a little bit lazy, because, like, Democrats probably do have less of a history of, like, lying directly to people's faces and then trying to gaslight you on the back end of it. So, like, I get why maybe if you're a journalist, you might just take Jen Psaki at her word on something. But we should not do that.
No. Well, I think
Um,
also if there's one thing that there's one perception that I think the Biden administration has created really effectively for themselves, it is that they do double talk. I mean,
totally.
the double talk situation has been wild already. And I'm not saying that that's worse than what Donald Trump was doing, but Donald Trump was almost always telling you exactly what he was thinking in the moment. And it was just never, it wasn't a logical sequence of things. You couldn't really follow it. Like, but you didn't have to ask a lot of these follow-up questions with him because you just weren't believing how insane what he was saying. He was
Right.
giving you the answers and you were just like, no, this is too insane. This isn't the truth, but it was the truth.
Totally.
The Biden administration is double talk central. And that is when, it's not, journalists aren't effective at covering someone like Trump because they don't know how to call him what he is.
Hmm.
They are effective at covering someone like Biden though. And there's a really important role for like real journalism.
Totally.
There wasn't a roadmap for real journalism with Trump because no one knew how to cover something. That was such an unprecedented, weird situation.
Right.
We live in like an infotainment culture.
Yeah.
It was all very entertaining. Like I get how things, I'm not happy about how things happen, but I get what happened there.
Sure.
Like the Biden administration requires an active press because they are going to act like regular politicians of both parties
Yep.
who tell you one thing and mean another thing and who will try to redirect you to what they want you to hear instead of what they, you want to hear. Like we have to treat them like people that we need to get follow-up questions from. Like,
Exactly. Yes. That's it.
yeah.
Yes. So let's hold them accountable in the same way that we would hold
or in a
anyone
way that we didn't bother holding Trump accountable.
Right,
hold them
right,
accountable in a way that we should be holding everyone accountable and failed to for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
One good thing that's happening though, thanks to Biden, is it seems like the vaccine situation is really hitting the ground running.
Yes.
Johnson & Johnson is getting out there.
It's already in arms. I saw people getting it on my television this week.
I've also like a bunch of friends who were really stressed about the, finding vaccines and stuff like that. Were suddenly able to get appointments like for the next day. So it does seem like the supply is opening up.
Isn't that charming?
I know someone in California who got a vaccine recently.
What do they do? Who do they lie to?
They went with someone at the end of the day who was qualified and they got an extra dose.
I had a coworker actually who like literally just happened to be at CVS. And they made an announcement.
That's amazing.
That they had vaccines that they had to basically like get rid of.
But I think I'm also hearing like pharmacies in upstate New York that previously had been designated as vaccination centers but didn't have a supply are suddenly available because the Johnson & Johnson supply makes it so that they don't need special freezers and things. So it does seem like there are areas where it's starting to expand more rapidly and appointments are starting to open up. Now we have like 24-hour vaccination centers now.
I heard about that. Yeah,
they're vaccinating something like 8,000 people a day. So it according to Biden, they're going to have enough vaccines for every adult by the end of May. Now, obviously, we have to give those to people, so it's going to take into May or June to give those to people. But that means that we really will have had a very fast, rollout once we got over the initial hump of Donald Trump being the original president. And it seems like, especially for getting it to like rural communities and things like that, the Johnson & Johnson thing is just like opening up a lot of doors.
It's huge. Yeah. And Merck helping them to produce it is massive.
That I think.
And very rare. I mean, I think the last time that they did this was, I think it was in working together on one of the daily HIV medications. But otherwise they really sort of these pharmaceutical companies don't really necessarily talk to each other.
I feel like also though, this should be like, I don't understand why these companies weren't being sort of encouraged to all work together.
Well, obviously there's money for them to be made by doing this, obviously. I mean, it's not.
And it's also a huge national crisis. This is why you invoke something like the Defense Production Act. Like this is why you need strong federal leadership, is so that you can be like, if we're going to rely on private companies to produce these things, which is already maybe an insane way to be doing this, because it means that it's not just sort of like being handled for humanitarian reasons. It's all being done for profit anyway. Then like at the very least, like force Merck to make a vaccine. Like,
Totally.
I
Yeah.
mean, at the very least.
Yeah.
So, and when we need it, because a whole bunch of states are opening back up based on who can know what criteria.
I mean, we are basically going to be in a rush with the vaccinations and new variants and dumbass states putting us into like a 10th surge at this point. Like what surge number are we
I know.
into
It's
right
like,
now? Basically, like Florida's reopening back up right now, and it's like spring break central down there. It's like we need as many of these vaccines into people as possible, because like dumbasses are going to try and fuck us up.
that's right. Yeah, we saw, I mean, the most high profile state that did this week was Texas, but also
Mhm.
Mississippi, Alabama, and West Virginia all ended various restrictions like mask mandates and indoor capacity caps, and they've raised them
Yep.
in a lot of other states, like even in New York State. Obviously, some states never had a mask mandate. Oklahoma just didn't have one, so it's no
Yeah.
big deal. But we still have, I think now 524,000 people have died. So that
Yeah.
means that when you heard like last week that we had crossed the 500,000 mark, like 24,000 more people died just in the last week or two.
Right.
Meanwhile, the Alabama mask mandate is expiring on April 9th. They've just said they're not going to extend it. In Arkansas, they ended most of their indoor capacity restrictions, and the mask mandate is only going through the end of the month. It may continue based on some data, but who can know? Iowa ended their mask mandate in February, and it was already a fake mask mandate, so they don't even know. Mississippi ended their mask mandate this week. Montana has already ended their mask mandate, and there's certain places that are keeping the mask mandates in place. But Greg Gianforte is a new governor there, and so it was Steve Bullock that put the original mask mandate into effect. So of course, Greg Gianforte, who's like a complete asshole, would do that. The North Dakota mask mandate expired at the end of January, but do you remember when they had the highest COVID rate in the nation? Because they don't seem to remember that.
Nope.
South Carolina ended a mask mandate. Or they never had a mask mandate, but they ended their mask mandate in federal buildings. It's still, their executive order still recommends that you wear masks in restaurants, which it's like, what? That's the
But you
one place
can't.
people aren't wearing masks.
Right.
Texas ended all of their restrictions is going to as of March 10th. The statement that Greg Abbott made to do this is a like hodgepodge of contradictory statements. I was watching there's a meme on TikTok about it, because it's like if you listen to it, every sentence tells you something that contradicts the last sentence, where he starts it by saying like, COVID is still like a real and present threat. So of course we've ended the mask mandate, but of course we want to exercise caution. But of course, COVID numbers have gone down, so there's no reason to worry. But like the whole statement is just like a ping pong between statements about how serious COVID is and how they're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah.
So
Well, and that's the thing, I think that like, because it's getting better, I think that like people are feeling like that this is okay to do, but like, again, it's amazing how short people's memories are, because it's like,
it's not actually getting that much better.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, it is better, but still bad. Like I was looking at, that I was like sending you what like the daily totals in Los Angeles were for like freaking ever. And like, they were up into the sort of like, 16,000, 20,000, like when it was like real bad or whatever. And like, obviously we're away from there right now, but I think like just yesterday, it was still like 2,700 or something like that. Yeah. And like when we were doing good in Los Angeles, we were having like 500-600 cases a day, like when we supposedly were like the gold standard of like keeping shit under control. So like the fact that, and I realize that we are not getting rid of our mask mandate right now. So we are not Texas, but I mean, like, I'm just using that as an example for like what better is. Like we're only air quotes better, The
like, rate is still quite high in New York as well.
Yeah.
And also I would note that they looked at the data from LA about where those surges were coming from, and West Hollywood did not see very much of a surge. And West Hollywood has put a huge number of resources into not just mandating masks, but encouraging people to wear masks. And
they're writing tickets.
Despite an active nightlife scene. I mean, there's a lot of disadvantages in West Hollywood in terms of preventing spread, because a lot of the economy of West Hollywood is it's like a place that was literally founded to be like
restaurants and
bars. And so there's not like another industry in West Hollywood besides just like clubs. So the fact that West Hollywood didn't see a huge spike but surrounding areas, including some wealthy surrounding areas, did, I think is an indication that mask mandates are kind of important.
Yep.
West Virginia's threading an interesting needle because they decided everything could reopen at 100%, but they didn't end their mask mandate, which listen, if you're going to pick one of those bad ideas to do, I would say it's better to keep the mask mandate than the restrictions on gathering. I feel like at least the mask mandate, I mean, it's not great, but at least with the mask mandate, you're not endangering people that aren't electing to go into some of these establishments.
Yes.
So I think that is a worthwhile, if you're going to have a bad idea, I would say it's not an all or nothing thing like Texas is implying where you have to end everything at once. Right. You can keep a mask mandate and open everything up if you feel strongly that everything should open up. And that I think is a better plan than ending the mask mandate under any level of openness. Yeah. I'm not a scientist. That was just my idea. What can you do?
You're more of a scientist than Greg Abbott is.
Well, that's true. That's a good point.
Who I think tried to blame Biden on the amount of spread in Texas on like him opening the borders or something completely bonkers.
Yeah. Well, of course he did.
God,
of course
that guy.
Meanwhile, New York State has a real situation brewing. Is Cuomo going to have to resign? I mean,
I think so, right?
This happens to us sometimes. I mean, remember when Elliot Spitzer had to resign? I mean, this is happening out there. But 2 more former Cuomo aides have come forward now and accused him of sexual harassment. That brings the number of accusers up to, I think, 5 now.
Yeah, there was 2 more just today, right? Wasn't it today or yesterday?
2 more yesterday, and there were already 3. One of whom wasn't an aide, but who interacted with him at something, and then 2 who were aides. But it also just
one of whom isn't shying away from a television camera, also, which
certainly
is probably not
one
what
of them
Cuomo is looking for.
Is pursuing Twitter fame as well, so it's not looking good for him. Also, there's been a lot of people at various levels of government, mostly women, who've come out to be like, "Dude, you're a dick. You should resign."
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't want it to seem like I was trying to call her a grandstander because she was going on TV. I mean, God bless her. If that's how she felt, like, she should be doing television interviews. The blame is not on her. The blame is on Andrew Cuomo for being a skis bag.
But also, just before we started recording this, big news broke in that story. Because Andrea Stewart Cousins, who is the head of the state Senate in New York, just called for his resignation.
Oh, snap.
The most powerful sort of, state level Democrat.
Sure.
In the Senate, but like that's one of the 2 major bodies. So that's a big deal, is what I'm saying. She's the highest level person to call for his resignation at this point, and she is also a very high level state politician. So so that just happened right before we started recording. So I don't know the details yet, but that's a really big deal.
Wow. Yeah.
But here's the thing, you guys. Do your 2 terms and get the fuck out of there. You're in New York State. New Yorkers like to eat you alive in your 3rd term. They'll find the thing that will eat you alive. I mean, they'll find it. So if you don't have a sexual harassment scandal, they'll find something else. But like, just do your 2 terms and get out of there. The 3rd term is the one. That's the one that gets you. And he was planning to run for a 4th term. I mean, this fool is part of a dynasty and still doesn't know this very simple rule. So no sympathy for him, because he certainly could have not had this happen. And this also broke just on the heels of him being embroiled in another drama, because he was part of a huge cover-up to make it look like there weren't as many nursing home deaths, in the COVID crisis as there actually were. And then the Attorney General here, who's great, revealed earlier this year that like thousands of people we'd undercounted by like thousands in the number of nursing home related deaths. And so the correct figure was actually like something like 50% higher than the figure that the New York State Health Department had published. So,
well, and that it's really this thing that I think is actually going, like, obviously the sexual harassment issue is enough that should be enough there for him to have to resign. But I think like if he was doing an exemplary job otherwise, then we know what elected Democrats do when they would make an excuse for him. And some of them are still continuing to attempt to do so and wanting there to be an investigation first and blah, 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 and, you know, whatever. But like, I think this sort of like this being the backdrop for sort of like what's going on politically outside of the sexual harassment scandal, I think sort of is what is going to allow people like Andrea Stewart Cousins to sort of like feel like it's maybe okay for her to call for his resignation, because like there's shit going down anyway, you know?
Well, and
like,
also I think what happens is if there's a scandal like this, it's problematic. But if you are also not liked personally by anyone in the government,
right,
then that can be fatal to you. So he is a person who is massively disliked and then also lied about why this happened. You know, he claimed it was because, you know, he was worried about Trump because Trump had been making threats about the funding for New York State. But they actually began concealing these numbers months earlier. And he has actually gone through great lengths to basically like control the data that's coming out of New York State. You remember when all of his public health officials quit, it's because he had been ignoring their advice. He was someone who was trying to sort of single-handedly, you know, while writing a book about how to lead in a crisis, sort of steer the ship without any input from any experts. And this is the kind of crisis you get caught in. It's sort of problematic because I think it shows that his initial response that was so celebrated was not as successful as he claimed that it was, but also you can't recover from this if nobody likes you anyway.
That's
you know?
it.
I mean, I think there are plenty of politicians who have sex scandals and, you know, come out and people make claims about them or whatever, but people enjoy working with them or think that they're, you know, they're good at their job. And so they let it slide. Our current president being one of them. So it's not that there's not precedent for those kinds of things being ignored. And he is not in a situation where there is a split government right now. So this is not coming from the right trying to drive a wedge or something. I mean, the Democrats have supermajorities in both chambers. So this is really about the Democrats not liking working with him. And they don't. I mean, he's the person who created the IDC. They don't.
I was going to say, why would they like working with him?
Exactly.
He tried to screw over his own party on multiple occasions during his
engineer things so that so that Republicans would have more power than they deserved. So this is why, listen, if you're going to be someone who sexually harasses people, first of all, don't be. If you're going to be, you should make sure that you are also not just like the most unpleasant person to work with for everyone else, including women you aren't sexually harassing and men.
And lying about shit in the media.
And you should not lie so much about shit in the media. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, he's an asshole. Like as a person, that's his.
Yeah. What was that? There was that article I sent you earlier this week, like from Politico, that was, I can't remember exactly what the headline was, but it was something like, "We're now all remembering that Andrew Cuomo is a jerk," or something like that.
Like, he's like a known asshole. Like we shouldn't be.
We forgot during the time that he was being celebrated as, you know, an American hero.
It's because I think in New York State, a lot of the amnesia is because people remember Mario Cuomo fondly, and so and they're watching Chris Cuomo on TV every night. Like I think he's sort of benefiting from there being so many Cuomos out there that no one remembers what an asshole he is. But he's like the worst, you guys. Like, and I have been saying that since the days of that glorious Democratic debate with Jimmy McMillan and Howie Hawkins and all of the great gubernatorial candidates from famous parties such as the Rent is Too Damn High party.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was a stripper or a prostitute.
Yeah, I think it was a porn star or something.
Porn star, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were a lot of people running at that time, and they were all genius choices. And Andrew Cuomo somehow came off as the worst choice in like a field of like literal nonsense people. I mean, it was really amazing. He just seemed like such a dick. I was like, the only person who sounds like a Democrat on the stage right now is Howie Hawkins. We know Howie Hawkins has a hilarious voice, so that makes him funny. But he otherwise is like a fairly reasonable person. I wouldn't say that he was necessarily the most compelling presidential candidate, but he's been a compelling gubernatorial candidate here before. Mm-hmm. He's from the Green Party. If you're not a person who knows the basics of New York State government, electoral history. But Andrew Cuomo has, since those days, since his very first run, been like a known asshole.
Yep.
So get rid of him. I would
for him.
love if he had to resign in disgrace, because I just feel like that's a fitting end for him.
I think he's going to have to. It seems like.
Knowing him, he might not. I don't know what goes on with, like, I feel like he likes a strongman tactic as much as anyone else. In any case,
in final news,
March 4th came and went.
Yep, it is March 7th right now.
That's right. Donald Trump has not risen.
Nope. There was no second insurrection. There was no second inauguration of a different president. I don't think Donald Trump was even in Washington.
Nope.
I'm sure he wasn't. I'm sure he was playing golf someplace. Yeah, no, nothing to see there.
And there wasn't much going on at the Capitol either, because the people got convinced that that Antifa was doing a false flag operation, and designed to trick them, and so they didn't show up. And then Donald Trump didn't show up. He was supposed to just show up of his own accord. He didn't need them there, according to the mythology. But he didn't show up either. So instead, no one really showed up, and everyone, and then the FBI was like, there was no false flag operation, you guys.
Right.
This
also,
wasn't a real thing.
The reason that Antifa didn't have anything to do with anything is because they just literally didn't have anything to do with anything.
Right.
They weren't there.
Because they don't exist. So that's
well, there's also that. But there was no organized. We heard from FBI director and Chris Wray this week, who basically debunked all of the conspiracy theories that there was some sort of like organized leftist extremist, like disguised as Trump supporters at the US Capitol, which remains one of the most ridiculous things that has ever been suggested about what happened on the 6th.
I know.
Just everything about it. Too crazy and stupid. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it. It's dumb. If you suggest that, you're a dumb person.
Everything that they've said about quote unquote Antifa has been dumb, including the fact that I have heard many Republicans at this point use the term Antifa fascists, which is
what?
The silliest. I mean,
anti-fascist fascists.
Anti-fascist fascists. They're anti-fascist fascists. Yeah, to the extent that they don't know what they're even referring to. I mean, they're not even sure about the context of it.
Yeah.
It did give me an opportunity to revisit that great TikTok of those girls acting out Donald Trump's speech about Antifa, where he said they were going to throw soup cans.
Soup cans. How they're the perfect size.
Yes, the perfect size. Soup cans. That remains one of the greatest Trump oratory moments in history.
Good. Yeah.
But yeah, no action. Donald Trump did not become the president. Are they pushing the date again, or what? Do they have a new date in mind?
I don't know.
Are they like the apocalypse people, where they just are like, oh, it didn't happen in March, so it's going to happen next year?
Yeah, they just make up a date. Yeah. We've been my boyfriend and I have been watching Parks and Rec, which is actually way funnier than I would have ever thought that it was. I mean, I've been really enjoying it. But anyway, there's an episode there where like some guy who is like an end times person, but he's like basically like just a blowhard, obviously, because they all are. But like he basically like books his end of the world like big parties based on like when there's like a free spot on the calendar with the Parks Department, essentially. And then just declares that night is going to be the end of the world, and then just when it's not, just moves it to the next available date on the park schedule. I feel like that's what
Q is up to.
People are doing right now. Like March 4th was the next date that Q was just going to be in town.
Available. Right.
Yeah.
In any case, looking forward though to hearing more about which members of Congress were communicating with all of these people on January 6th, because that's information that I feel like is still out. And
being investigated.
Also, it's being investigated, and CNN broke the story, and then Ken Klippenstein or whatever his name is was like, I broke this story for like the Intercept.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And then so there's a big war about who broke the story, because it was broken by the Intercept, and then CNN pretended like they had just heard it somewhere. Because they didn't want to credit sort of like a vaguely progressive-y news source, I guess. I don't know. That was a funny war that broke out on Twitter.
God.
But, that's the news.
Yeah, that'll be good to see.
That will be good to see. Yeah. I'm curious to know whether next week we'll be talking to you with $1,400 or not? Will I be able to spend $1,400 on talking to you, or will I have to spend my own money? It's hard to know.
Yeah, well, it's exciting. Keep us all posted.
I will.
Do you think that Biden has his name on these checks?
I hope so. But the last time it was direct deposit, so I don't.
Yeah.
It just
He
showed
should,
up.
though.
I mean, that's.
If he doesn't,
If Donald
that's a
Trump taught
fail.
us anything, it's that an idea that we laughed at him for was a genius ploy.
Sure
Because
was.
lots of people were like, Donald Trump gave me $1,200, and
Almost
listen,
got him
I get
reelected.
it. The Democrats never give you money, and when they do give you money, they give you a smaller check than they promised.
Right. And then don't tell you.
And then don't tell you, exactly. So I get it. But in any case, that's the news this week. We will talk to you next week. And the week after that. Just all the weeks. You'll be hearing from us. Bye.